So I want to create a context. I once heard a fabulous line. Frankly, I wish I'd said it, but I didn't. But it was such a gewaltig line. I'm not certain. I think it was said at an Aguda convention, I believe. I'm not sure who said it, but it was so precise and crisp. And the line was that yesterday's discipline is today's abuse. I wish I'd said it. See, what most of us struggle with is two levels of this struggle. What we struggle with is we're all programmed. We have neural programs, all of us, from our childhood that inform us of what discipline, chinuch, what it should look like. There's cause and effect. There's denial of love creates motivation for compliance. If you need it, then you give punishment. You elevate it. Most of us grew up with that world. And it's really, really, really crucial that we understand once and for all, let it go. That world is gone. And I want to just make the case in 2 minutes, just to make that so clear that we can let it go. And chaval that we didn't know this when we were bringing up our children, because it was already happening. And no one told us because no one knew. Somewhere in the 60s is where the process starts. I'm not going to be myrich on this, but just the details. In the 60s, when the Vietnam War was strongly happening, and young people in this country resisted that war, stood up to the American government. The National Guard had to go out and fight with young children, 19, 20-year-olds, on campus. It affected a change that started in the world that affected us too. The government had to sit down and discuss conditions with children, with youths, teenagers. So the status of a teenager was elevated to the status of an adult. That process continued as in the world around us, television in the secular world exploited children through commercials because they were watching TV. And the commercials, the corporate America grabbed the commercials to grab children, who children became consumers. Children weren't consumers prior to that. Parents went out and bought the needs of children. They bought clothing, toys, whatever it was, and put it in their closet, in their room. Children didn't go shopping. But all that changed. And that process started unfolding and continued with, into the generation. I'm just jumping forward into the world of the iPhone and the iPod and the iTouch and the I, where, everything's me. It's not where a family has a stereo, but every individual wants their own. So the point here is the status of children became elevated. They considered themselves to be adults. They just don't have as much money, credit cards, or car keys. If you ask them, children, can you drive better than my parents, Avada? I'm 14, so I can't, but Lamaisa, of course I do. Of course I could. Children think of themselves as adults. Why is this crucial? There used to be on society, in the world we live in, there used to be a lid on society, and that lid, I call it deference to elders. Amal, this lid contained children. So children with all sorts of disorders and struggles, whether it be impulse disorders or problems or issues, whatever they were struggling with, were somewhat contained in a world, a society that had this lid of deference to elders, where you had to do it. When I was a child, I'll give you a dugma, we went to school in London, and we had to go on public transport. There was no school busing, and you wore school uniform. If you were seen On a bus, not giving your seat to someone older than you, you got a detention. You were called out in assembly and you got a detention. Deference to elders. A teacher walked past you, you stopped talking. The principal walked past you, you lowered your eyes. That world is gone. That world is gone. So therefore, the systems that we use, the principles of chinuch, of discipline, that we use that are programmed into most of us from that world are abusive. They're abusive because those children don't have that lid of deference to elders. So yes, yesterday's discipline becomes today's abuse. Chaval, we didn't know this. Every one of us becoming parents should know this. You have children becoming parents. Tell them. Educate them. We all have to know this. Chaval, we didn't know this because we are not abusive people. We are kind, loving parents. And we wanted to do the best for our kids. None of us decided, let me see if I can join Avi's group. Let me see if I can get one of my kids off the derech so I can join. They look like an interesting group of people. We have to connect with what actually happened to our children, because most of us, honestly, we're still bewildered looking at our children, trying to understand what happened. It still doesn't make sense. Everyone who speaks to me, everyone who comes over to my wife and I, talks to us, everyone, it's the same thing. It's like, I don't get it. I don't really understand it. It doesn't make sense. Well, not everyone, but almost everyone. We struggle with that. That's why we must talk about and understand the details of what happened to them and why is that called abuse. And it's that abuse that causes trauma. And that's that trauma that causes their reaction. And that's why we have to understand that sugya so deeply. That lid on society is gone. There may be individuals, children, who somehow have in their neshamas, they have it. And you see it. We all see it. There are certain children somehow gebenched with that feeling, and they have deference to elders. One of our children used to stand up every time I walked in the room. I said, stop it already, enough. It's like, but she just stood up. It was all natural. She dressed sanua. I said, is it hard for you? She said, why should it be hard? There are one or two like that. But most of the kids are dealing with a world where the meisters of chinuch are still functioning on, not only are they functioning on shitas of old, but if you look at the books they put out of compliance, what students have to comply in and out of school, it's become an encyclopedia. It's not a book, it's volumes, where how they have to behave every second of their day. It's exactly the exact wrong thing to help a child vaxois. It's the exact opposite. It's pure external control where there's no lid on society and we're pretending there is one. And when we as parents cooperate with that list, because we're terrified about children being thrown out of school, so we fall in and cooperate with that list, with those books, those manuals, student manuals. So we're being abusive. I'm not saying we're abusive people. I hope everyone's clear. But that's abuse. For most of the kids, that's abuse. Because they can't do it. So in that context, that historical context, we have to come to terms, this is where we are today. This is where we are today. Get used to it. It's not changing. It's getting worse, if anything. It will never go back to what it was, ever. This is the world HaKadosh Baruch Hu chose to give us. And so we have to relate to that world. And we have to understand that world and what children need in that world. In this world today, the contemporary world, which takes tremendous effort on all of us because we have the wrong programs, most of us. In our brains, we have the wrong programs. I should just, one of the key words, by the way, this is preamble. I'm going to go to the slides in a moment. I just got to get this off my chest. One of the key things I hear people tell me all the time is when, and I'm sure Abavi hears the same thing all the time. How could you let him, you're saying I should let him do that? I should really let her do that, right? Do you relate to this question? Really? We should let them do that? It's Parshat. What do we let them? Do you have effective control to stop them? Do you? Please show me the list of all the things you have effective control over your children. Write the list. Go ahead. Let's see. Hands up, all the things you have effective control. Let me tell you what effective control is. It's when your child wants to do something that you don't want them to do, or they don't want to do something you do want them to do, and you can stop them without ruining your relationship with them. You can stop them without ruining your relationship. That's called effective control. So let's have a show of hands. How many people feel they have effective control over their kids? Please everyone look. Baruch Hashem. So accept it. That's not called letting. If you have no control, no effective, we could have control. Let me abuse them. Let me padlock them to a bed. That'll stop them going out at night. Effective control helps them grow. Other external control destroys them and is abusive. So I ask you, are we letting them do things? Or are we observing them, connecting with them, understanding them, going on a journey with them, being taimech, helping support them as they go on their journey to do what they're doing? Get these things, letting, these words, how could you let them? This is archaic. This belongs to a world that's gone. The lid is off. We have to accept that. If we can accept that, we can move forward, and then we can work out how not to traumatize our kids more, and B, we can work out humbly, how we already did traumatize our kids. How did they get traumatized? What happened to them? We have to allow ourselves to let it in if we're going to have the compassion and love to nurture them through their lives. We have to let it in. They got abused. We're going to talk now about traumas, the abuse related to frum kids. What we were doing till now was the science of abuse, the science of trauma, the mechanics of it, so we could understand it, that they're not being bad or evil or defiant, but makes sense to us. What we're going to do now is understand what you'll never get in the secular world. We're going to understand the nuances of how our kids got abused. And my goal in this, I'll do it quickly. I'm not going to go through all the slides. There simply isn't time. But I'll pick bits and pieces to talk about. Is the goal of this session is that we should have such deep compassion and take responsibility that we participated in that abuse. We didn't do it deliberately. We're not bad people. But when we did those manuals, when we tried to force them against their will, we participated. We did. And we owe it to them to acknowledge that, to accept that, and to stop doing it. Do you understand? We owe it to them. Let's look at what we call relational or developmental trauma. And there's, as you can see, 5 categories. And obviously, there's overlap between them all. We've talked about this again and again, the physical, emotional, psychological, sexual, and spiritual abuse. I'm going to break it down into these 5 categories with bits and pieces. You have more material and more comments there. I'm not going to go through it all. As I say, there isn't time, but just to highlight each one. So let's take a look at physical. I said yesterday that Svei Pech is no longer acceptable. The insult patch is fine. Let me read something. I want to read something. So this is a letter. I'm going to read you a letter that someone sent, a shaila, a halachic shaila, to Rabbi Leib Steinman, Zeichdei Kodesh Levracha. And this was the shaila about chinuch. When this so-called tshuva from Rabban, and you'll see, forgive my language, but you'll see I am justified in it, and he agreed with me. And I'll show you why afterwards. When this so-called tshuva was hung up all over Lakewood to justify beating kids, hitting kids, and it was considered a victory of those who disagreed with our mahalach, shall we say that? And there's lots of them out there. Here's what the tshuva said. B'dover she'loschem ha'im nishtanu darkei chinuch habonim v'abonos b'yameinu miderech mesur lonu b'chazal u'b'poskim. The shaila is, have the ways of chinuch changed from that which Chazal gave to us? And the tshuva seems to be, ha-tshuva, ha-Torah lo tehei muchlefes, Torah doesn't change. Chaysech shifta soini b'noi nema gam b'doreinu. Spare the rod, spoil the child, is also talking about our generation. V'yeled koton, shemischatzev le'imai, mutter lahakoisei. A small child who's chutzpahdik to his mother, mutter lahakoisei, you can whack him. You can hit him. Ukamuvan, sha'akot taseh das v'lo b'achzorius. And obviously, the hit should be done thoughtfully and not with achzorius. Bacher bar mitzvah, shemekalelis hayrov, or mischatzev ba'oifenacher, a bar mitzvah bacher, who curses out his parents or is chutzpahdik in some other way, you have to be, so it's a chiyuv to mochiach him strongly. Otherwise, he's going to go off the derech. Paladika tshuva. Paladika tshuva. When I saw this tshuva, it made no sense to me. It disturbed me profoundly. I didn't believe for a minute it was true, but there it was with Rabban Leib's signature on it. I went to my Rebbe, to Matzio, and I told him, this can't be. It doesn't make sense. So I wrote footnotes together with the mashgiach. I flew to Eretz Yisrael and I spoke to Rabban Leib. And I showed them the tshuva. And I was very surprised at the Kabbalah's Panim I got. It was a very warm Kabbalah's Panim. I was very happy that I came. I didn't know why at the time. And I wrote footnotes, and I want to read you the footnotes. Let me do it in English. It'll be easier. Okay, so I'm going to do it in English. So the footnotes say like this. We said, the Torah doesn't change, right? And the mother, if the mother, he's chutzpah to his mother, it's self-understood that you have to do it sensibly and not uncaringly achzorius. So we wrote a footnote. Therefore, if one is in doubt whether he is able to hit with anger, or if one has a doubt, a sophic, that the hit might be abusive, okay, you win. You win. Or if he has a doubt that the hit might be abusive, in other words, you have a sophic. If you have a sophic that maybe I'm hitting with anger, just a sophic. Or I have a sophic that maybe I'll do it in an abusive way, then it's also to hit the kid. It's forbidden. And then it says later on, the bar mitzvah boy is a chiyuv to rebuke him, otherwise he may go off the derech. And we wrote the footnote, for this will bring the child's heart closer to Yerushalayim and observance of Torah mitzvahs. However, if the rebuke, if the tochacha may cause the opposite to occur, to distance the child from Yerushalayim and Torah mitzvahs, then obvious, one's potter. You shouldn't do it. So it seems like a steerer, right? Here's the whole letter, and with the footnotes, it's a contradiction, the whole thing. Because tell me something. Does anyone know? Does anyone know when you hit your kid? I have no suffix. I did that, l'shem shemayim. I did it without a smidgen of anger. I was totally, wow, was I full of Yir Shemayim at that moment when I hit my child. And he knows darn well there was no achzorius in that. When I rebuked my son for acting achzori over bar mitzvah, he was fully aware that it was pure Yir Shemayim that motivated me and my love to bring him close to Torah mitzvahs. That's all I wanted. And therefore it was a gentle, kind-hearted rebuke. Yeah? Because if not, it's also to do it. Turns out that the tshuva was mezuyif. Someone was mezayif it. It wasn't a real tshuva in the first place. That's why Rabbi Leib gave me such a nice Kabbalas ponim, because he didn't know what to do about the tshuva. I was actually thrilled that such a tshuva could be written and corrected with what he really felt. What he really felt was, in this generation, find me someone who knows how to rebuke properly. Maybe he could do it. Find me someone who has no suffix that any hit that ever happens to him, that hits without any achzorius, without any anger. You're not upset. It's pasha just like a mitzvah, what can I do? It's a mitzvah, It's like, he writes him for Hashem Akeinu v'kevseinu, shetkabel es hakol zu mamish, ba'ava mamish v'ishkarev es b'ni l'kvod shemayim. Now, honestly, how many hits, how many hakos, how many times were our children hit, smacked, hit, threatened with a smack or a hit that wasn't this way? How many? How many times since their children were in school did they get threatened with or hit by a parent? How many times? Rahman al-Islam, in a world where we didn't know this, we thought it was the old world, remember? That was the old world where the lid on society was still there. In that world, Efshe v'ulai. I know I got hit. I turned out okay, I think. Yeah? Okay, good. That's right, caned, hit. Okay, we got over it. But it was without anger. I must tell you, even my father, when we got caned, it wasn't an instant act. He sent you for the cane. He stood where he was. You brought the cane and presented it to him. Then he sent you to your bedroom. 20 minutes, 30 minutes, be mispoinin on your chet and put a few books and things down your pants. I'm pretty sure. He then came in totally calm and sat down next to us. What did you do? How do you feel about it? Did you promise not to do it again? And then you bent down and you got 2-3 whacks and it was over and never talked about again. Even in that door, he understood it. No achzorius. But our children, it's abuse. Right? You have to understand this hitting, punching, whatever goes on, it's abuse. It's real abuse. And it cuts off their neshamas. And if, we're going to see later in a moment, if we do it l'shem Torah mitzvahs, then you've got 2 abuses. You've got physical abuse and spiritual abuse. This world can't handle it. It's done. It's finished. It's over. Maybe the insult punch to a 2-year-old makes sense to me. It's not about the pain or the hurt. It's about the insult. I hear that. Everything else, and we have to take ownership that we did that to our kids. And we have to really own that and apologize for that. That is physical abuse. It is traumatic. Emotional abuse. Emotional abuse is where we make our kids feel worthless. You'll never become anything. You're going to keep doing that, you're never going to be anyone. You think you're ever going to be a good father, a good mother? You think you'll ever be a Talmud Chacham if you don't study? again, it's old world chinuch. It's the old stuff that doesn't work in this generation. It makes a child feel worthless. It takes their self-esteem from them. No wonder they look outside for other things to fill them, to make them feel good, to block the pain because they feel horrible. Emotional abuse is where we degrade them. You know, a child comes home in the most typical home and says, I want to watch a movie. Little kid, 10 years old, in yeshiva, comes home, says, I want to watch a movie. Honestly, let's be very honest with ourselves here. What is the reaction of most parents? It's not pretty. Do you know what you're meant to do? Not to do emotional abuse? You're meant to say, Schaefer, it's so interesting. I wonder why you would want that. Tell me more. Let me hear what you're feeling. Where did you learn about movies? This is so interesting. I'm learning something about you. This is important to me. Help me understand where. I'm not saying you just say you open a big screen, immediately at 10 years old. But be interested in his feelings and emotions. Why does he want it in the first place? Connect with his soul. What do most of us do? A movie? What? In our house? Everyone knows their narrative. Those narratives, in context of what I've described with the lid off society in this world, is abusive. You know what it tells a child? Don't trust mommy and tati. Don't trust them. It tells a child, don't feel safe with your own emotions. It tells a child, your emotions make you a bad person. The fact that you felt, you heard about it, the kid may not even know what a movie is. They heard the kids talking about a movie, saying, I want to watch a movie. And meanwhile, we've destroyed the kid who doesn't trust us. Their emotions are wrecked inside. They don't trust themselves. They thought it was an innocent question. I want to watch a movie. They heard kids talking about it. Shefela, it's so interesting. Where did you hear that word? Where did you hear about movies? Come talk to me. Here, let's sit down and schmooze about it. I want to hear you. I want to understand you. Everything else undermines their self-esteem. And the yelling and screaming and complaining and all the rest of it at children's behavior to try and motivate them, it destroys their emotions and feelings. It makes them not safe. Remember, we talked each year about safe, secure, seen and so. We're all living it now, right? Baruch Hashem. It doesn't make them safe. It doesn't make them feel secure. Certainly doesn't make them feel seen. It's abuse and it's traumatic. That's the point. It creates in them the need to go to fight and flight. And it's one of the multiple, do you remember we said in complex trauma, the thousands and thousands of little mini events, each one on its own is not trauma. Put them together and you have a trauma victim who's constantly triggered. A kid has a right to their emotions and feelings. We may not approve of, we may not be happy about their emotions and feelings. Kid comes home, a teenager, and suddenly announces, I want a girlfriend. Most of us have a heart attack. We have a heart attack. We just fall apart. We go crazy. Instantly, telling our kid through our facial expression, body language, and tone of voice that you can't trust your feelings, and I don't trust your feelings, and you're not important to me. I devalue your essence. Masha Ein Kain, you say, wow, well, I didn't expect that. Whoa, that's so interesting. Tell me more. Tell me more about what's going on inside you. I'm so interested. Help them feel validated as a person. Otherwise, it's emotional abuse. You realize each one of these I could talk for hours about. I'm just 10 l'chacham. I just want to highlight a couple of points because, we want to try and get through the material here. Psychological. This is very confusing to most people. Some other programs, they call this one intellectual. I call it psychological. Devaluing their values. Confusion of values. Here's the important one. Contradiction or hypocritical parental behavior. You know when we do that the worst? We are great darshaners. We love darshaning. Oh boy, do we love darshaning. We can say divrei Torah about ben adam lechaverei that's roy. Torah anytime will hire any one of us to give drushes all over the world. We are so good at it. And then in the very moment you're giving a drasha about sensitivity in midas, you're angry with your kid who's nudging his sibling, and you get mad with him and scream at him because he touched his sibling and he yelled and interrupted your drasha. And what's the drasha on? Midas. You don't... See, again, in a world gone by 50, 60 years ago, water off a duck's back. In the world today, a kid they look at each other, they think you're a crackpot. They think you're mad. And they have worse words than that to describe it. Yeah, he's always darshaning about midas. He's always darshaning about Lashon Hara. I hear him talking Lashon Hara about me every day. The confusion in values, it undermines psychologically the mahus of a child. It's abusive because it tells them not to trust their own feelings of what's right and wrong, what's good and bad. They don't know how to trust themselves. Here we are officially, I'm guessing, God-fearing people. Is that pretty reasonable assumption? Yeah? You think so? You're a bit scared to commit. But let's say yes. Let's say yes for the sake of argument. So are we aware of this beautiful mitzvah of V'ohavta l'recha kamecha? Did it occur to anyone that it includes your children? It's a mitzvah aseh d'oraisa to love your kids. And yet we mevatel that like nothing. What do you think that feels like to your kid? How does your child relate to your Torah and mitzvahs, your values, especially when you darshan at the table and say a very long, boring Dvar Torah, or, noch besser, a moedike maisa of some heilige Rebbe and his incredible sensitivity that went amazing in Ben Adam L'Chavero, while the whole time you're angry, yelling at your kids because they're not listening. And then if the wife, who she usually does, tries to calm you down, you yell at her too. What do your kids see? It's a confusion of values. It's a contradiction. It's a destruction of their psychological makeup. They don't know what's right and wrong inside. And this happens from little all the way up. So later on, they're disconnected to it. They don't want to hear about it. They see it all as hypocritical. When they go to school and they hear drushes upon drushes and they have kinusim and everything about Lashon Hara, and they regularly hear Lashon Hara being spoken about kids, to other people, from teachers to other teachers and rebbes and people. It's like free for all. It's not free for all. It's a very big cheshbon. What to say, how to say, when to say. But they hear it, and in their unsophisticated, youthful minds, they don't know. They really don't know what's right and wrong. And that adds to the trauma. So they get into that mode of hearing. You start talking about, values, and midas, or whatever. It's traumatic to them because the association to them is the contradiction of being told gewaltige divrei Torah, while it's being contradicted as it's happening by the behavior of the very people who are saying these drushes. It's abusive. Psychological, you see I put there underneath, a lack of parental shalom bias. You see that piece. What are we all doing? This is just an aside, but let me just forgive me for a moment. Almost every one of us have sat through very fascinating drushes at Sheva Brachas, where people get up, are very passionate, and lie to the chas and kala about life. Passionately. We've all done it. We've all been there. I've actually sat there a few times next to the very famous Rosh Hashivas, and I'm so dying inside listening to this rubbish about how life is going to be. Completely and totally unrealistic. Disconnected from reality. It's out of Disney. I don't know what did they see here? Who invented this idea that it's all going to be perfect and you can build this Bayis Ne'em and Yisrael and you can be Gedolei Yisrael and you'll be Mashpia on all Klal Yisrael. Tomorrow you're going to fight. How are you going to take that fight and use it comfortably? I've been at Sheva Brachas where they made me stand up and speak the truth. Marriage is hard. And I speak it to Chas and Kala and everyone around the room is going... But I tell them the beauty of that hard and how to take that hard and what to do with that hard. And by the way, your kids in Mitzvah Hashem are not going to turn out the way you thought. Get used to it now before you have them. I don't know. We buy into fantasy rubbish. I don't mind if someone gets up and says, "Soll der Eibishter helfen? I have no clue if this is going to happen. Chances are it won't. But halavai, I'll give you a bracha, it should happen. And you'll be the yotzei min haklal, that everything will go right for you." I wish they'd say it. I don't mind. Give them a bracha, but don't set them up for failure. We're all lemmings, and we go into marriage with this rubbish in our heads, thinking it's all going to work out. Nobody told us it's not. I will. And that's how we become abusive to our kids. Because we expect it. That's how husbands and wives bicker with each other, as if you would just have the meal more fancy on time, maybe the kids wouldn't rebel. Really? Well, maybe if you wouldn't give these driveling long divrei Torah that bore everybody, that no one could follow, maybe they wouldn't go on and on. The lack of parental shalom bayis, listen carefully. If we're not presenting to our children a picture that they admire, then why would they want it? Do you understand? Spiritual abuse at its essence, and I just don't know how to say this enough, frequently and clearly enough. If we don't present a model to our children of at least our attempt in a loving way to live a loving life close to the Eibishter, supporting each other through it, if we don't present that, why on earth would we expect our kids to want to emulate it? Why? And with all the handicaps and the difficulties and the struggles they have in life, with the package together of all these things of relational trauma, the physical, the emotional, psychological, and we'll come to the sexual in a moment, with those things that happen, how are they going to do it? How are they going to do it? Aleph Beis Sheba Aleph Beis is that we should at least show our kids that, we're happy with our life. I'm zufrieden with my life. This is my life that Hashem gave me. Zufrieden with it. not blaming each other. There's nothing worse for creating psychological abuse and trauma in our children than a husband and wife ever, God forbid, bickering in front of the kids about, why did you do this? And you shouldn't have done that. Ki'ilu, it's all your fault. Or it's all your fault. Bottom line is, that's not a life I'm interested in. Thank you very much. Sexual abuse. So, what can I say? We know from studies, I did the studies myself personally years and years ago. Others have repeated it when I first spoke about the figures that I know to be true. People thought I was mad. They condemned both the figures and me. They thought it was crazy. They misquoted what I say. This is one of the most misquoted things I'm ever misquoted about. The incidence of sexual abuse amongst our children. Because the facts are, we're looking at, and these are conservative figures, that 1 in 5 of all our children in the Frum, Yeshivish, and Hasidish world will be sexually abused during their childhood. 1 in 5. That's an enormous figure. That's a very conservative figure. Certain Hasidic Rebbe came to me and said, I'm not going to say who it is right now, but he said to me he wanted to speak to me about the things I was saying about abuse. And when I mentioned the figures, he said, I don't agree. And my heart sank, because I know this, I've gone through this time and time again. He said, I think by us it's worse. He said, I think by us it's worse. I think your figures are too small. I was so amazed. Someone who really deeply gets it, who sat through hours of conversations with me. He gave me 20 minutes, and then we sat for hours talking about sexual abuse and understanding. He wanted to get the tiefkeit of everything, and he was convinced it's much worse in his kehillah. By the boys, for sure. In the group of children, unfortunately struggling off the derech, this group, the research tells us that it's about 80%. It's about 4 out of 5, the goyim, that really push them off with sexual abuse. It's about that, something around there. All the other traumas are the other 20%. And of course, there's complex trauma, where they have all of them together, which makes it so difficult to deal with. Sexual abuse becomes the most insidious, the most painful, the most destructive you see of all the abuses. And the reason it is, as I explained yesterday, and I just have to keep saying it again and again and again so we can embrace it. For a child who's been sexually abused and is now sexually aware of themselves as a sexual being, to sit through school, elementary or high, to go through life knowing that everything around me looks at me as a goy gomer. My school, my Rebbe, my teachers, my parents, everybody, if they would know my interest in myself sexually, they look at me as a goy gomer. They would throw me out in a heartbeat. So internally, they throw themselves out. They don't have a context, you see, because in a healthy context, in our world, in a healthy context, as I said, we are taught, we teach, ideally, our children a concept called tznius, both boys and girls. There's a concept of tznius. And that concept carries them till they get married. In that world of tznius, there is never a mention, ever, of anything sexual. Ever. Till right before they get married. And right before they get married, they get education of some sort. And if it's done properly, halavai, so the sugya of sexuality is now incorporated into the sugya of tznius, It's one sugya. It's just an addition to something they're familiar with, and so therefore can be supported. A child that gets married and 3 months later, she's a beautiful girl, from everything's fine, and she gets married and 3 months later she's pregnant. And she tells her mother is overjoyed. It is a simcha rabba ma'od. Correct or not? Am I right or wrong? Deserves a few good tears. Yes? No? Am I right? It's a beautiful moment. It's something we support. Do we know that she was sexually active to get there? Well, yeah. But that's not the point. Because it's in the world of tznius. It's just, we don't discuss that. Because in the world of tznius, everyone knows what happened that got her there. But it's not discussed in that world. It's just accepted. And it's beautiful. And it's something we support. And we encourage. And we praise. And we're proud of her. And there's hugs and kisses and joy. The same girl, God forbid, 3 months before the chasna is pregnant, is Gehinnom of die Welt. There's no possibility to support such a thing. There's pain, there's feelings of death. There's feelings of failure and loss and hopelessness, incomprehensible pain. It's just 3 months earlier. Same event. The exact same thing. Peladikazach. When it's in a context, sexuality, that we can support in a tzniistic way without talking about details, chas v'shalom. Chas v'shalom. But just, everyone knows, but we're just joyful for you. You have a baby, you're getting pregnant, it's a wonderful thing. For the children who are sexually abused and become sexually aware of themselves as a sexual being, there is no place in our world to place that, to put that. There's no place, there's no mokum. We cannot give support. We cannot love them. We can't accept them. And what they experience is such hurt and pain, such confusion, such loss, such disconnect, such failure. The feeling of disconnect is a projection. Lu Yitzuya, you would know what I'm up to now. You would reject me and destroy me. They know that. They know that. And so internally they're already rejected and destroyed. And then when we discover something about their behavior, we have the insensitive gall to be angry with them. To kids who are already internally destroyed, we have the gall to be angry, to be upset with them, to question them and doubt them, to be outraged with them. We heap insult on injury, and we create profound trauma. Profound. It's so bad on every single level possible. Even when they eventually get married later on, they take into their marriage this internal feeling that there's something damaged, bad, and wrong with me because I feel sexual and I want to be sexual. There's no out. Without treatment, without intensive treatment, there's no recovery. They are trauma victims, she'en kamo. To me, it's no shock at all that they disconnect from our world, because our world has no place for them. 99.9% of all kids who go through this, something happened to them. No one woke up one morning and decided, I want to be sexual. I want to rebel with sexuality. It never happened. Something happened to them that took them into that world, that exposed them to that world. And there is a permanent distortion of normative sexual development for that child. It's done. Boys who get molested, typically the pre-puberty boys, the little kids, they get molested already in primary. Most boys, the molestation is very, very early in life. Those boys, ruba deruba, when they hit puberty and they develop tivus noshim, they no longer develop a strong mania against tivus anoshim. It was taken from them. A regular male at puberty develops tivus noshim and a mania, a disgust for tivus anoshim. Hashem gave it to us, protects us with it. These boys, that disgust for male sexuality is taken from them because of what happened to them early on in life. And guess what? They never get it back. Never. They will find themselves 50 years later in a Beis HaMedrash feeling they can't be in that Beis HaMedrash anymore because they see a man they feel attracted to who became a member of that Beis HaMedrash. And the worst part with our children is we blame them for this too. We're so angry and upset with them about their sexual acting out, totally missing the point that what they need most of all is our acceptance and love, our understanding. They need to see us heartbroken for them, not heartbroken for ourselves. Heartbroken for what happened to them. Not angry and upset about their behavior. It's the worst form of abuse. It destroys them, their everyday life, every moment. Every single moment is destroyed. Once a child, a frum kid, recognizes their own pleasures of sexuality, they don't turn that off. You can't put that back in the bottle. You can't reverse time. You can't become unsexual if you were sexual. You're now in that group. And yet they have years before they can go and get married. What are they meant to do with that? That they never asked for to be brought into that world. They never requested it. They never wanted it. They were forced into that world. They were exposed. And you can't turn it off. And everywhere around them, they see our hatred of them because they're interested in sexuality, which they never wanted in the first place, and have nothing that we can support, nothing. It is the most profound abuse. Our kids need us to recognize that. They need us to feel that. They need our empathy, our love for them. Not our sorrow for ourselves. They need that sorrow to be for you. I feel so sad for you. It's such a struggle for you. If there's ever a moment ever in our lives to get the ego out the way and care for someone else, that's the moment when you discover that about your child. I just want to also mention the secondary trauma when kids are not believed, that someone touched them or someone did something to them inappropriate, and they get questioned. Are you sure? Do you really think it happened? Maybe you misunderstood because it was someone choshev or was a family member. We got to protect. And we start in a moment protecting, Do you know that secondary trauma of not being believed is worse than what I've just described? It's worse when they see a look of doubt, a question in our minds, trying to work out what happened as if we don't really want to believe it because you can't believe he really meant that or he really did this. Secondary trauma is worse because now you've lost the people you really needed in your life to trust you, your parents. Your Rabbanim. You needed their trust, you needed their support, and you lost them too. Secondary trauma is worse, more devastating and more damaging and much harder to treat. And the final one is spiritual abuse. Let me take the first one. Oppressive Frumkeit. Oppressive Frumkeit. Again, in the world prior to that lid being taken off society, I don't know. I'm guessing that somehow oppressive Frumkeit worked. I don't really understand it. I wasn't there. I don't know. But I'm guessing it somehow worked. Oppressive Frumkeit is where we get our kids to comply with Torah and mitzvahs through threatening them, through being upset with them, by being disappointed in them. We nudge the kishkas out of them about tzitzis and nagelwasser and who knows what, that we just, you washed? You did wash? Oppressive Frumkeit is where you live a life of Torah mitzvahs. It's like an OCD life where you're terrified God is going to strike you dead if you didn't do nagelwasser properly. Do you know it's not true? It's not true. I don't know one client yet who was stricken dead because God, he didn't do nagelwasser that morning exactly right. And yet how many parents go, no, that's not how you do it. You got to do the whole hand. You got to move it 3 times. You didn't use enough water. Oppressive Frumkeit. That's a bracha? You just said a bracha? Shem Yerachem, that's not a bracha. Let's hear a good bracha. And you force this poor kid to say the bracha who can't even say the bracha properly. And that's not how you say the bracha. Let's hear that bracha again. Here, let's get a siddur. Let's look inside. And we fool ourselves into thinking we're doing God's work. We're doing the Satan's work. We're driving our kids away from Torah mitzvahs. Torah mitzvahs is meant to be geschmack. It's not to be heavy like that. It's a process for children to grow up, to embrace and do, and they will. But they're much more likely to do it when it's geschmack, and far less likely to want to continue doing it when the association we gave them to Torah mitzvahs is that it's terrifying if you didn't eat a kazayas. Oh no, he didn't eat a kazayas. Whoa, you're not yoitza pesa deraisa. What's going to happen? And this poor kid's trying to stuff down and you, of course, got 3 times the shir because you're a big machmir in what a kazayas is. And he's trying to stuff down that little bit of matzah. And he's terrified of your wrath and anger, which, of course, God is going to come. Hey, Novi will be at the door in a minute and kill me dead, for sure. And there's this panic in the house about that kazayas. Rabbeinu Shalom. It's the Satan's work. That's not Hashem's work. I think I need one too. Shkoich. I got it. Parent being disrespectful of the child's reality. Children are a work in progress. Spiritually, they are a work in progress. Not all kids are going to embrace and absorb and do everything just on time because grade level says they're meant to be doing it now. So therefore they should do it. They'll get there sooner or later. But I assure you, they will not get there when we panic. Oh no! Is he wearing, the comments, is he wearing scissors? Did you see his scissors? Is he wearing scissors? He is wearing scissors? He's not wearing scissors? Was mir Leben? Oppressive Frumkeit, and especially when it's inconsistent. Let me tell you one of the incredible inconsistencies that many kids have pointed out to me, intelligent kids, later on, when we work through their spiritual abuse, detail by detail. You have to unfold it. In therapy, it unfolds. And I look for the most smallest details of things that turned them off. Because we've got to repair that somehow. We've got to make sense out of it somehow. Benching. You know what a mess benching is? Spiritually, what an utter mess it is in most homes. You know what benching looks like in most homes? Someone takes a bencher, after Rabbi Shimon Russell, the rest of it, and it goes like this. This is benching. No. Could someone tell me what that is exactly? What connection has that got to do with the tefillah thanking Hashem for food? What? And kids see this rubbish, they laugh about it. They describe this to me, what they saw and why they don't bench. They think the whole thing's a big joke. What are you actually... What is that? And then 15 noos in between. You're much more worried about nooing your kid than davening to Hashem. It's a lot better just to bench beautiful dveikus dik to Hashem, and then you want to sit down with your kids. Sit down and bench with them afterwards. Let them see what benching is. I remember one girl told me her journey back started. She told me how much she hated benching. Hated benching. It was like such a focus of oppression because of this. I said to her, I said, what would you like to do? Because I saw she wanted. She said, why can't I just close my eyes and say thank you, Hashem, for the food? I said, it's not a bad idea. I think it'd be a good idea. I think Hashem would appreciate that. Why don't you do it? She said, I could? What do you think benching is? She had no clue that's actually what benching is. I told her, say it in English, by all means, do that. Let's start there. Let's see what happens. And she ended up benching and coming back. I'm not saying that was the one event, but you understand, the hypocritical, religious inconsistency, all this stuff, and especially us being disrespectful of their reality. Where are they holding spiritually? What are they able to work with? Okay, let me talk just a few minutes about something really important. It's nogea to trauma as it's nogea to the true or false diagnosis of ADD and ODD. Today everyone's familiar with ADD, of course, and probably ODD too, oppositional defiant disorder. And we know they share one leg. They're both impulse disorders. So watch this. How many people here have heard of an impulse disorder? Could you just show hands? Okay, it's basically everybody, right? You all know what impulse are. How many people could actually define what is it? What is the mechanics of an impulse disorder? What does it actually mean? Sorry again? Well, look, this is what an impulse disorder kid does. Some of you may know a child like this. Often loses his or her temper, often argues with adults, often refuses to comply with rules of adults, often deliberately does things that will annoy other people, often does things and blames others, often angry and resentful, often spiteful or vindictive. Anyone know a kid like this? Exactly. Not to understand what an impulse disorder is means your child will experience from you frustration and disappointment, tolerance at best, holding your breath around them. They'll realize you're walking on eggshells because who knows what's going to trigger them next. Let me see if I can explain to you what an impulse disorder is once and for all, again, so that we can have compassion, so that we can feel so deeply sorry for them. And not only feel deeply sorry instead of walking on eggshells, but actually know what to do. And I include in this piece the true impulse disorder kids, there are some, the fake impulse disorder kids, who are the kids who have a whole variety of complex trauma. And if you remember when we looked yesterday at the neurological pictures, we know that one of the things that shuts down when you go offline is control over impulses. So trauma emulates impulse disorder. So all traumatized kids, whether or not they have a real diagnosis of ADD or OD, it's irrelevant. You're mechuyev to know what is an impulse disorder and what are you meant to do as a parent to deal with it. How are you meant to live with it? So let's do compassion first. The Eibishter made every human being in a way that we protect ourselves from danger. Remember we talked about the amygdala, its job to alert us. So in life, things happen to us where we have cognition that there is a threat coming my way. Hopefully, after this weekend, we will make sure we are not the cognition of our children when they see us coming their way. They will not see us as a threat. Because kids can do that. They see mommy or tati walking in. They already feel scared. What I do wrong? There are many threats that can happen to people. Emotional, physical, psychological, emotional, spiritual, and sexual threats. So when a child is aware of a threat, that means what occurred in the brain was cognition. That means they are aware that there is a threat. There's a wall in the brain where there's cognition. Then there's reaction to the threat. So you have cognition and reaction. We got that? There's synapses that connect these two experiences. Before we act on the cognition, in between the cognition and the reaction, in a millisecond, the brain develops multiple ways of dealing with the threat. There's a hierarchy, a list, and we choose, guess which one off the list? Healthy people. Healthy, non-impulse disordered people choose the one that's highest on the list for dealing with the problem that preserves personal dignity. Let me give you a mashal. If we were to walk out of here, outside, and as we're walking between the door downstairs and the main door, 3 wild dogs come running from the far side of the field, barking violently, big-sized dogs running at you. Would you all agree that's threatening? Yes. So you have choices. The threat occurred. In other words, the brain had cognition, was aware there's threats, and now you have to work out what's the reaction. So there are a variety of reactions. Run back in the building. Run to the other building. Climb up, there's this half-built building over here. Climb up that building to get off the floor, get away from them, right? Fight the dogs. Maybe there's a lamppost outside. Climb up the lamppost. Right? We all choose the one that's most effective in a millisecond, that best preserves personal dignity. So, for example, a man might more likely climb up to get out the way of the dog. A lady might well choose to run back in the building before she'll choose to climb up the scaffolding. Probably. I'm guessing. It depends. If the dog was really close, she may say, forget that, I'm going up the scaffolding. I just want to survive. In other words, there's a hierarchy where we choose how to react. But guess what? The choice in between cognition and reaction, the choice is the one that's most effective to deal with the problem, that best preserves personal dignity. Got it? That's a healthy human being. I'm about to show you impulse disorder. Watch carefully. Ready? That is an impulse disorder. They have no space between cognition and reaction. They are aware that something just threatened them, but they don't have a space. That's why it's a disorder. They go direct from cognition to reaction without the ability to choose the one that's best for personal dignity. So invariably, they will choose the one that's most effective for them, that's worse for personal dignity, that makes them look terrible. This curse of impulse disorder is an utter nightmare for a child who has impulse disorder, which occurs for kids when they're in the fight, the survival part of the brain, where they've gone from the limbic into the survival part, and they're now offline completely, and they effectively have an impulse control problem. That means they will do whatever's best to preserve life. I'll give you a story that happened early on in my career. A kid in the Cheder is fighting. He's an impulse disorder kid. He's fighting with another kid, and they're fighting in the playground, and the one with the impulse disorder considered himself to be the victor of the fight during recess and came swaggering into class feeling very good about himself because all the kids saw that he was matzliach in the fight in the playground. As the other kid, the one who lost the fight, comes in, he poked that kid hard in the ribs and then ran to the other side of the class, sat down laughing because he got him back. And this kid winced and realized he'd lost the fight. Impulse disorder kid, not smart thing to do. The kid picked up a book and he threw it across the class at this other kid, smashing his glasses, which cut his eye. Baruch Hashem, he didn't lose his eye, but cut his eye, and there was blood and crying and screaming, and Hatzalah came, and the Manal called me and said, he's out. He's out. We can't work with him anymore. It's dangerous. We can't have him in our school. So I said to the Manal, would you let me speak to him? I said, what's the problem here? Just talk to him. I know the kid. He won't talk. Which I understand how to translate those words. Of course he won't talk because you're accusing him and angry. Why would he talk? I asked the Manal, would you hold him in the office? It was towards the end of the day. I'll come down to the school and I'd like you to observe me talk to him in front of you. Would that be okay? The Manal liked me, so he said, okay, we'll try it. I said, but you can't talk. Just watch. Don't say a word. And the taina on this kid is we got to throw him out because he won't admit he'd done something dangerous. Therefore, he's going to do it again, obviously. And therefore, he's a danger and we can't have him in school. He's expelled. Regular impulse disorder kid. So I come to sit down with him. The kid's sitting very angrily in a chair. You know, you've all seen this. You know, that really angry, withdrawn face. Sitting there angry. So I come and sit with him, and he's not going to talk to me either. But I said to him, I hear this thing happened, and I go through the story. I heard that this happened in the playground, and he jabbed you in the ribs, and you threw the book, and you heard him, I hear. And he said, yeah. No, he said, like this. I said, well, it looks like it worked. It looked like it worked. And he looked up at me like, I said, yeah, I don't think that kid's ever going to start up with you again. I think it worked. The Manal was fit to be tough. I told him, you're not allowed to say a word. Not a word. Let me finish this. So I said to the kid, it really worked. I don't think, not only him, I don't think anyone in the class is starting up with you. Whew. book across the room, cut his eye. Wow, he's not starting up with you. You showed them who's the boss, right? And now he's like, yeah. He took the top thing off his list. He doesn't have a space. He was threatened, and he threw the book. There was no space. There was no nothing else. And then I say to him, and this is what I want to teach you. I say to him, you know, I hear he's in hospital. And he says, yeah. I hear he's in hospital. There's a question about his eye. He says, really? And I said, yeah. So they're like, I know you won. You did it. You showed him. Whoa. You showed him. But, like, it might have really, like, hurt him bad. I said to him, look, I'm wondering if I had been able to show you another way to put him in his place. If I could have done that for you, do you think you would have thrown the book? If I could have achieved the same result, if I give you another choice that you could have done, do you think you would have thrown the book? And he looks at me and starts crying. He starts crying. And clearly he felt so terrible about what he'd done. And he said, of course. And then he says to me, is he okay? It was his friend. These are kids, they're friends. And in 2 seconds, we're opening a space for him because he doesn't have a space. Neurologically, physiologically, trauma-wise, he doesn't have a space. So we're going to open that space for him. And you know how we're going to do it? By validating his choice. It worked. Not by undermining him. Not by telling him what a terrible thing he did. Of course he shut down to the manal. But as I didn't praise what he did, I acknowledged what he did. It worked. So he was connected to me. He felt understood by me. And then we moved into, do you think if we could come up with another way, you would have chosen that way? Do you think you would have? And he starts crying. Of course he would have. Felt terrible. Impulse disordered children don't have a space, so their choices are awful. They're always about self-preservation. They're always about themselves, just surviving. And then we're going to condemn them for using their God-given koyach of survival. We're going to, be angry with them. That doesn't help them. But if we validate, if we acknowledge, I'm not saying agree, but understand his choice, understand what she did. A girl gets sexually abused, and many of them act out. Many act in, so they cut, and they burn, and they dress like boys, and they do all sorts of horrible stuff. Others act out, and they dress like a prutzer, right? You know what she's really doing? She's really trying to get mastery over that horrible feeling of what happened to her. The lack of control, of being abused sexually. She's trying to get control over that feeling. So she dresses that way in the hope that she can normalize that experience and somewhat heal and not feel so bad. She's trying to make it normal. She's 13, 14. How would she know? She doesn't know. She's a trauma victim, so the impulse area of her brain is offline. She doesn't have gesunter impulse control. And if we attack her about the clothing, we lost her. But if we understand that makes you more comfortable, I don't know why, but I see that makes you more comfortable now. We can connect with her. And then we can maybe introduce other options and ideas into her life because we connected with her. She felt understood. work with trauma victims is always understanding that their impulses will always take them to self-preservation. That's always number one. And if we don't understand that, connect with it, tune into it, we can never help them move anywhere else. Never. Impossible. What time am I meant to finish? I'm meant to finish. Okay, we got material for next time. Don't worry. Let me finish with a thought. Obviously, I didn't expect to cover all the material. I had no idea how it would play out, but we will have time to talk, Mitzvah Hashem. Say again? I know, it's my English accent, I got it. My wife married me for this accent, by the way. Let me just say the following thought. Trauma treatment. We are all, I started yesterday by observing that we are all trauma victims, all of us here, every one of us. What we've been through and experienced makes us not the same type of trauma victims, but we are trauma victims. One of the key, beautiful treatment protocols for trauma victims, as well known, well documented, is journaling. We get kids to journal. You get them to write. You get them to externalize. You get them to bring it out. And you help them journal. And it's mainstream, a wonderful, wonderful way of dealing with trauma, because you externalize your feelings and you get acceptance and support by journaling. Journaling is a wonderful, wonderful tool. It's like, basic bread and butter of trauma treatment. So I'd like to suggest some bread and butter of trauma treatment for this Shabbos, for this weekend. We're going into a wonderful, amazing Shabbos. I looked at the roster of speakers. Pasha, I was mishtaimim. I'm telling you straight. I was mishtaimim. How they pulled it together. We have people, in my opinion, are the Gedolei Yisrael, the Gedolei Yisrael of caring for other Jews. We have those people with us this Shabbos. You have each other. We have each other. So I want to suggest a twist on journaling, because we're not going to write on Shabbos. No heter. Even Avi won't find a heter for that. Or maybe he did. I don't know. Maybe he did already. But I want to suggest verbal journaling for this Shabbos. That means let's connect with each other. Let's share our tzaros and our journeys. Let's share our successes. Let's share our struggles and support each other. Let's spend Shabbos together doing spiritual journaling with each other, where we can truly support each other, feel free to open up. We're in a safe environment here where we can truly share what we've been through with each other, and we can support each other, and we'll walk out cleansed and helped, and maybe we'll take some of that trauma out of ourselves and therefore be more grounded to do this work that we've been talking about during these 3 sessions. I want to thank everyone very, very much. Thank you.